Today's daf is daf mem gimel. Let's just review a few points from daf mem beis that'll give us the takeoff for today's daf. We have a machlokes on daf mem beis between Rav and Shmuel regarding the shechita of the paraduma. Rav disqualifies a zar, a non-kohen, for the shechita of the paraduma, and Shmuel holds that a non-kohen is kosher for the shechita of the paraduma. The derivation of Shmuel is based on the pasuk that indicates that it's lefanov, that when the Torah says with regard to the shechita of the paraduma, it says the word lefanov, and the way Shmuel interprets that pasuk is that there's another kohen that is shechting the paraduma in the presence of Elazar HaKohen. And that other Kohen is not, and that other person, is not a Kohen. And Rav, on the other hand, says that since the word Elazar appears in the Parsha, and it also says Chukah in the Parsha, therefore, according to Rav, it's absolutely critical that it be Elazar. And that's Rav Shita. The Gemara later on points out that there are other Amoraim who also have the same identical machlokes. But in any event, Rav is the one who says that Shchitas para psula bizar. Shmuel holds that Shchitas para shera bizar. Now, in addition, what we discussed in yesterday's shir on Daf Mem Beis was the entire seder of the psukim, and we're going to have to go back to the seder of psukim again today, and Belinetta will look at some of the psukim inside. But we have to keep in mind a statement of Ula. Ula says that Kol HaParsha Kula, as we go through the Seder of the Avodas HaPara, the Mais HaPara, we're going to interpret it in one of two ways. One, and both are correct in different psukim, as we'll see. One is called Mashma Motzi Miyad Mashma. That means that the second pasuk has the mashmos of being mavatel and being motzi, the mashmos of the previous pasuk. And in other cases, it's going to be the mashma memela, that the second pasuk, the following pasuk, is coming to be mekayim, that which we learned already and derived from the previous pasuk. It's not coming to be motzi and mavatel, but rather to be mekayim. And the last part of Daf Mem Beis, Amid Beis, was Ula presenting the beginning of the parsha of Paraduma in Bamidbar Yutes, Unesatam Osam Osa El Elazar Kohen, and the simple meaning of Elazar Kohen is that we need the Skan Kohen, but then it says Osa. And Osa is telling me that although that original paradum at the time of Moshe Rabbeinu required Elazar, the Skan, but lo Lidoros. And that was one opinion that Ula quoted. There was another opinion that said that even Lidoros, we require a Kohen Gadol. And it's not enough to have a Skan, we have to up the ante, and we require a Kohen Gadol. It was a third presentation of formulation that Lidoros Kohen Hedjot, that even a Kohen Hedjot is fine. So we have one opinion that we need a Skan only for Moshe Rabbeinu's Paraduma, and as far as Lidoros are concerned, we don't need Elazar HaKohen. But exactly what that means, we don't need Elazar HaKohen, is now being interpreted in this third quote of the Ika Amri that it's enough to have a Kohen hedge for the avodas paraduma. And there's one Madhyam that says no, notice we jack up the ante and we require a Kohen Gadol, and even a skan Kohen Gadol is not sufficient. Now today's daf is going to start here on daf mem gimel on the top line v'shachat osa, and we interpret this pasuk to mean shelo yishchot acheres ima, that he should not do one ma'isa shchita with one long knife for two different paros. And there's a long discussion based on a sugin chulin about whether or not in general shchitas behema requires kavana. And if you assume, for example, a shchita requires kavana, then in a case where he shechts two animals, then he has to have kavana for both of them. One of them is for the purpose of a paraduma, and the other one therefore becomes a hesech hadas. So he's not to be shechting another behema, another para, let's say, for example, at the same time. If, on the other hand, you hold that shchita is kshera b'chulin even below kavana, which is the shita Rabbi Nasan in chulin, then in this case, even though he didn't have to have kavana for the second shchita, and therefore would not qualify as a hesech hadas, nevertheless, since he shechts together with the shchita of the paraduma, another shchita kshera, that is going to be excluded, and that pasels the para based on this drasha of v'shachat osa. Now the pasuk says lifanav, so we're going to have now a repeat of what we mentioned earlier, which is the sugya daf mem beis. Rav, according to Rav Shita, you need a kohen to shech the carbon, the paraduma, and shchitas paraduma is psula bizar. And what is the pasuk therefore lefanav telling me? It's telling me shelo yasiach daitu mimen, that he has to have total focus and concentration to be careful that nothing of any sort of psul will occur during the course of the avodas hapara. And Shmuel says that Yehezar shochet veloza roa. He understood that shchitas paraduma kshera bizar, and he derived it from the word lefanov, meaning that there's another person, a zar, who's shechting the paraduma, and Elazar is just simply watch. Now we go on in the psukim, and the next pasuk in this parsha, which is pasuk Dalid, says v'lakach Elazar hakohen midama betzba'o v'hizah el nochach pnei ol moed midama sheva pamim. Now we talk about what's called Kabbalah v'hazas hadam, and the Torah says explicitly Elazar hakohen. L'Shmuel, who holds that the shchita of the para can be implemented by the zar, now the Torah is telling us that with regard to Kabbalah and Hazas Hadam, Ladure le'elazar. Now we're throwing the ball back into Elazar's court. It's no longer a zar, but the Torah is telling me v'lakach, referring to the taking of the dam, and it's got to be Elazar HaKohen. So the Kabbalah Saddam and the Hazah Saddam is only on through the medium of Elazar. And again, we're going to have machlokes here about whether lidoros we require the Kohen Gadol or it's enough to have a Kohen Hedjot. And this is the way Shmuel is going to interpret the pasuk v'lakach Elazar HaKohen with regard to the dam. And what that means is that Shmuel is applying the principle of motzi miyad mashma, that the next pasuk here is commenting levatel ulahotzi from the previous pasuk. So whereas the previous pasuk said that even a zar is fine for shchita, and that was derived by Shmuel from lefanov, this pasuk v'lakach Elazar HaKohen midama is teaching me that no, we have to require Elazar HaKohen, which might mean the Kohen Gadol, it might mean a Kohen Hedjah, but we definitely are excluding a zar from hazas kabbalah and hazas dom. Ula Rav. The Rav was of the opinion that the previous pasuk was talking about shechita, and we were machshir only Elazar, and we disqualified a zar. So why is the Torah now again repeating what we already know and emphasizing the lakach Elazar Kohen? Forget about the Kabbalah and the Hazas Adam. I mean, in the previous pasuk, we addressed the case of Shechita. We required Elazar Kohen, according to Rav, to the exclusion of a zar, and therefore the Torah didn't have to re-emphasize the lakach Elazar Kohen in the next pasuk. And Rav is going to say now, miut achar miut, the ein miut achar miut el rabos, the afilu Kohen hejot. So what we're saying now is that according to Rav, although shechita requires the skan Kohen gadol, once we get down to the next stage in the avoda of the paraduma, meaning the Kabbalah and Hazas Adam, now the pasuk is telling me a ribui that we can be okay with the Kohen Hejot, and we don't need a Lazar. It comes out now that even according to Rav, we're operating with the principle of motzi miyad mashma. That the later pasuk with regard to Hazas Adam is coming to be mavata what we learned in the previous pasuk. Yeah, so both Rav and Shmuel are operating here on the same wavelength of applying the principle of motzi miyad mashma. According to Shmuel, the motzi miyad mashma is telling you that although shechita is kshera bizar, when we get to Kabbalah and Hazas Damim, we need a Kohen. And again, possibly we need a Kohen Gadol, according to one opinion, but in any event. And Rav is going to take it the other way around, that whereas in Shechita, in the previous pasuk, we excluded anyone but a Kohen, meaning we excluded a Zar for the Shechita. Here, what we're saying is, by applying this principle through the mechanism of Mirach Amir Larabos, of Motzi Miyad Mashma, we're going to derive the conclusion that don't think that, like in the case of Shechita, where the Torah B'dafka wants Elazar, here, with regard to Kabbalah and Hazas Adam, it's fine if you have a Kohen Hejot. So whereas according to Shmuel, Hazas Adam, we're going to jack it up to the status of Elazar. According to Rav, the pasuk now, V'lokach Elazar, is lowering the level because of Ein Midrach Hamid and telling me that you don't need Elazar Kohen, and any Kohen Hejot would be fine for the Kabbalah and Hazas Adam. Now we go on to the next pasuk. And this describes what we call hashlochas eitz erez ve'ezov u'shnitolas l'sreifa, as the Torah puts it in pasuk vav, v'lakacha kohen eitz erez ve'ezov u'shnitolas v'shlich el toch sreifas hapara. And the Torah specifies the kohen. So now the Gemara, in the name of Ula, works out this pasuk according to Shmuel and according to Rav. So again, Shmuel holds that the previous pasuk, with regard to Kabbalah and Hazas Adam, requires Elazar, right? That we said we sent the ball back into Elazar's court, Ladure Elazar. And now the Torah is saying that V'lokach HaKohen means as opposed to Elazar HaKohen, and we don't need the Skan Kohen, and certainly not the Kohen Gadol, for the Hashlochas Eitz Erez, the Ezov Ushnitolas L'Sreifas HaPorah, the Afilu Kohen Hejot. Ula Rav, according to Rav, when the Torah says here in Hashlochas Eitz Ha'erez, etc., V'lokach HaKohen is coming to teach me the Afilu B'Kohen Hejot. No, I'm sorry. According to Rav, the previous pasuk was with regard to Hazas Kabbalah Nazosam was already machshir a Kohen Hedron. So why would the Torah repeat with regard to Hashlochas Eitz Erez, V'ezov, etc., into the Sreif? Again to repeat Kohen. What are you telling me? Meaning, even if you would omit the word HaKohen here in this pasuk, we would still come to the conclusion that a Kohen Hedron is fine. It's true. Salke daitachamina. Why do I need the extra word HaKohen here? It's not extra at all. Kevan de lav gufa de paraninu. When we talk about hashlochas eitz eres ve'ezov shnitolas into the streifa, there's no contact. This is not an avodah beguf apara, and therefore we would think lowly boy kohen. If this is not an avodah that has a direct relationship to the para, then we don't need a kohen. So the Torah has to emphasize no, kamash malan, that even this avodah requires a kohen. So now we're going to have a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel as to which of the principles, the two principles of Ula, should apply here in the case of Hashlochas Eitz Eres Ve'ezov. According to Shmuel, the pasuk of Lokach HaKohen is Motzi Miyad Mashma. In other words, it's coming to be mevatel the previous pasuk. The previous pasuk with regard to Kabbalah Vazos Adam, the Torah required a laza, right? That was when we said that we sent the ball back into Elazar's court. But here, even a Kohen Hedjot is fine. So this pasuk is coming to mevatel the previous pasuk, and therefore Hashlochas Eitz V'erez is fine with a Kohen Hedjot. We don't need a laza Kohen. According to Rav, both Kabbalah Vazos Hadam and Hashlochas Eitz Eres V'ezov are all ksheros b'kohen hedjot. So this pasuk comes under the second principle of Ula called Mashma Memela, that the second pasuk is coming to strengthen Lekayim with the previous pasuk to be Machshir Kohen Hedjot. And now we move on to the next pasuk, pasuk Zayin. It says v'chibes b'gadav hakohen. Now, again, the word hakohen here in this pasuk is completely redundant because in the previous pasuk it already said hakohen. So, what is the new hakohen teaching me in the context of v'chibes? As we said, the Torah did not have to repeat the word hakohen. So the interpretation here, and that's Ula, is bechihuno, that the requirement is that in the context of Asiyas Hapara, the Kohen has to wear Big Day Kahuna. There was a Havamina here that since in the context of Maisa Hapara, we're not dealing with Hakrav al Gabi Mizbeach, and perhaps we need Gufa Shel Kohen. The Torah does say HaKohen, but how do we know that we need Big Day Kahuna? Now, exactly which Big Day Kahuna we need is a major issue here. Is it the 4 Big Day Lovin of the Kohen Gadol? And that's based on the Sifri and the Gzer Shav of Chuka from Yoma Kippurim to Para, because in both cases it says Chuka. And on Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol has to wear 4 Big Day Lavan, and therefore the Kohen in Asiyas Hapara would wear 4 Big Day Lavan. Or could it be the 4 Badim of a Kohen Hedjot if you don't have that Gzeir Shav of Chuka? And there's going to be an Afkamina with regard to the Avneit. And there's even a possibility that in the context of Chuka, of that Zereshava, we might require that the Kohen who is doing the Asiyas Hapara would wear Shmona Begadim. Shmona Big Day Kohen Gadol. Again, all this is very, needs a lot of study. I'm just mentioning there are a wide variance of interpretations of what this means. Bichi, who know exactly which Begadim the Kohen has to wear at the time of the Asiyas Hapara. And now we get to the end of that same pasuk, After v'chibes begadav hakohen, the pasuk continues and says v'tamei hakohen ad ha'orev. And once again, the Torah repeats the word hakohen. What's it teaching me? Kohen b'chiuno lidoros. That this requirement in Asiyas HaPara of Big Day Kahuna applies not just to the original Paradum of Moshe Rabbeinu, but in all generations, the Avodas HaPara must be implemented while the Kohen is wearing his Big Day Kahuna. Now the Gemara goes back to the Machlokas that I indicated before, which is the sugi that we studied yesterday, about what's the din of Lidoros. This works out according to that Mandi over back on Daf Mem Beis, that we had a miyut of Osa le'elazar, Shalidoros b'koin edge, that the Maisa Para, with the exception of the Chumrah of Paras Moshe, does not require those same Chumras. You don't require a Kohen Gadol. All you need is a Kohen Hedjot. Is Shapir. Now I understand why there was a need for the Torah to tell me that even though the Paralidoros is Kal, we're more lenient, we don't require Kohen Gadol, we suffice with a regular Kohen, but nevertheless you need Big Day Kahuna. But the Gemara thinks that according to the other Mandium, who says Lidoros b'Kohen Gadol, then it goes without saying we could logically conclude that we need Big Day Kahuna. Elamad Yomar Lidoros b'Kohen Gadol, that the mid of Osa le'elazar is coming to tell you that it's not enough to have the skan Kohen Gadol, but we need the Kohen Gadol himself. So then why does the Torah have to go out of its way to teach us about Big Day Kahuna? Hashta, let's apply our logic. Kohen Gadol be'inan, we need the Kohen Gadol himself. B'chihuno mi boy? Do you have to teach me that we need Big Day Kahuna? I mean, it's a Kal v'chomer. If the Torah is so machmir that it required Kohen Gadol Lidoros in Asiyas HaPara, in the Maisa Para, then for sure we have to be machmir and require Big Day Kahuna. And the Gemara answers in. You're right. We could have derived this logically with the Kal v'chomer. If we require Kohen Gadol Lidoros, then how much more so we require Big Day Kahuna? But Milsa, we have a principle of Milsa, the Islam Kal v'chomer, Torach v'kosav l'kro. That even that which we can derive logically, the Torah often will choose to write it out. Now we go to the next pasuk Tes in this case. And now we're up to something called Asifas Efer HaPara. The Asaf Ish Tahar Es Efer HaPara V'niach Michutz HaMachdim Makom Tor. And here the Torah says Ish. What does this mean? Lahachshir Sazar. When it comes to Asifas Efer HaPara, we don't need a Kohen. Even a Zar is kosher. And that's true even according to Rav in the case of Shchita, or Shmuel in the case of Kabbalah Vazos Adam, where we brought it back into the ballpark of Elazar. All these different Maisim have their own rules and regulations. When we get down to Asifas Efer HaPara, then we don't even need a Kohen. A Zar is sufficient. And therefore, if the Torah would have said V'asafes Efer HaPara, leaving out the word Ish, we would have implied that it's again referring to the Kohen, because the Kohen was mentioned in the previous psukim. So the word Ish is now coming levatel to undermine what we had in the previous psukim, and that's called Motzi Midei Mashma. Now the pasuk says Tahar, Ish Tahar. That's also redundant. I mean, the whole Paraduma, like any carbon, I mean, the Torah calls the Paraduma actually a chata, so it's typical of karbanos. It has to be done b'tara. We don't have to be told that only a tar is kosher for the asiyas hapar, not a tameh. So what do we derive from the extra word tar? Lahachshir es ha'isha. This extra word is a ribui to include an isha because she's also included in tar. So the Gemara says, wait a second. In the end of the pasuk, it says, "V'niach michutz lamachta b'makom tar." And what is the word "v'niach" coming to teach me? Only misha yeshbo das la'niach yotzu cherishot v'kon shem b'em das la'niach. Again, we're going to see the dissenting view of Rabbi Yehuda, but now we're studying the sheet of the Chachamim. And I see that Jerry joined us, so I'll just finish this sentence and then tell Jerry where we're up to. In any event, we're excluding now someone who doesn't have das. And the interpretation now of the word viniach means it has to be done with a thought process, and we require a mature bar das. And all over Shas, we always exclude cheresh shota v'katan. Keep in mind that a cheresh is someone who is deaf and mute, and that's not called a bar das. So we're now up to Tanan Hassam. Let's just see that, we have the place here. We're on Daf Mem Gimel Amid Aleph, which is today's Daf, and we're up to Tanan Hassam. And if you'll see, there is a Tosas Divrei Maschil V'Nasan, which is, I think, the fourth Tosas down from the top. And below that, there's a Tosas Divrei Maschil Ad, which is the fifth Tosas on the page. So midway between the two, a little bit closer towards the bottom, you will see Tanan Hassam. And now the Gemara is continuing to interpret the psukim in the Parsha Paraduma. And now the Gemara wants to introduce a fundamental machlokes between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda, which is codified in the 5th chapter of Masechet Para. Not awesome in the Mishnah, it says, "Hakol ksherim lekadesh chutz mi cheresh shot v'kod." This is the opinion of the Chachamim that we just saw earlier, that as far as placing the mayim on the Efer HaPara, we can allow anyone to do this hanacha except someone who's not a bardas. And therefore we disqualify a cherishot v'katan. Rabbi Yehuda, machshir b'katan, and Rabbi Yehuda is going to have the exact opposite opinion of the Chachamim. The Chachamim said that an Isha is kshera and a cherishot v'katan are psulim. Rabbi Yehuda says just the opposite. He's machshir b'katan. We have to see about a cherish and a shota. Let's right now assume that Rabbi Yehuda is talking about a katan, because a cherish shota, his kiddush is certainly possible even according to Rabbi Yehuda. He doesn't have das. A katan could have das, and we might have a gadol supervising him to make sure that he has the right das. But an isha or a suffix isha, like in the case of an androgynous, is excluded according to Rabbi Yehuda. And now the Gemara takes the time to try to analyze these respective shitos of Rabbi Yehuda and the Chacham. My time at the Rabbanon, why do the Chachamim say that an Isha is Kshera Lekadesh and Cherishot V'Katan Psulim Tichsiv? Because the pasuk says, "Bilakhu latamei me'afar sreifas hachatos v'nasan alav." I'm reading the whole pasuk. V'nasan alav ma'im chayim el keli. Now this pasuk comes right after the pasuk of V'yasaf ish tahar es efer hapara. Now notice that our pasuk, which is pasuk Yud Zayin, that's a little bit later than the earlier pasuk, we're skipping about 5 psukim. Our pasuk opens up with malakhu in the plural, whereas the earlier pasuk, V'yasaf, is in the singular. So how do we understand these two? After the asifas hapara, there's kiddush efer hapara, and that's the very next avoda subsequent to asifa. And it would seem that from the word velakhu, then it means that the osfim es efer hapara, those very individuals who gather together the efer hapara, they're the ones who will take the efer and they will be mekadesh the efer. What does that mean? What do we derive from that? This is the sheet of the Tanakama of the Chachamim. Hanach de pasi lecha basife, pasi lecha bekiddush. V'hanach tachshir lach basife, achshir lach bekiddush. So the Chachamim have this equation, and just like they excluded Cheresh Shel Tevakatan for Asifa, they will exclude him from Kiddush, all of these above, Cheresh Shel Tevakatan. But those that were included in Aseifa, we said that in Isha's Ksheira Aseifa, she's Ksheira also in Kiddush. So we now have a perfect parallel, a mirror image between the laws and the regulations that govern Asifa and those that generate Kiddush. Rabbi Yehuda, on the other hand, he was the one who said that as far as Kiddush is concerned, it's okay if a katan does the Kiddush, but we disqualify an Isha. Why did Rabbi Yehuda reject the Chachamim? And the Gemara explains that in Cain, Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that if the pasuk is coming to tell you that those who are kosher for Asifa, to gathering the Ephah, Haim, they themselves will be Makadish also, is Lema Krov Velokach. Just like it says V'yasaf in the singular, it should have said Velokach. My Velokchu. What's the change here? How do you just justify that all of a sudden the pasuk changes to a plural? And the answer is Dafilu Katan Depasi Lecha Hasam. Even if you disqualify a katan for Asifa, but nevertheless, Hacha, here in the case of Kiddush, Kosher. Now the Gemara wants to know, Isha Minola. How does Rabbi Yehuda know that there's this difference between the din of Kiddush and the din of Isuf with regard to Isha? And the Gemara answers that Rabbi Yehuda is going to dash it from the word V'nasan. It says V'nasan olav mayim chayim. At the beginning of the very same pasuk, it says V'lakchu in Lashon Rabin, and that's including an Isha. However, at the end of the pasuk, it says V'nasan. Why the switch from V'lakchu b'Lashon Rabin to V'nasan b'Lashon Yachid? And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda derives the conclusion that when it comes to the pouring of the mayim onto this mixture, that's called Nesinas HaMayim, where it says V'nasan in the singular, V'lo l'nasna, not for the feminine. In other words, the woman is not acceptable for Kiddush. So again, as far as Isuf Efer HaPorah is concerned, we're going to say that according to Rabbi Yehuda, Isha's Ksheira, but as far as Kiddush b'mayim, Isha's Psula. So the Gemara now clarifies the sheet of the Chachamim. V'Rabbanan, they hold that the pasuk is coming to be machshir, that the Ksherim for Asifas HaEfer are the same Ksherim for Kiddush. So now we have to justify, why did the Torah shift from V'lakchu, b'Lashon Rabin, to V'nasan in Kiddush, b'Lashon Yachid? And the Gemara answers that the Torah had to emphasize a lafuki ahavamin. The Ikas of Rachmana had it said, V'lakach v'nasan, if both psukim with regard to Asif and Kiddush had been written in the singular havamin, I would have thought that the Efer HaPorah, in order to be kosher for the purpose of Hazon and Tameh, is ad shakil chad v'yoyev chad. We need that the same person who takes the Efer is the same person who pours the Mayim and he's Makadish the Efer. He's therefore Kosa Rachmana V'lakchu. Therefore, the Torah uses the term in the plural in order to indicate that these could be two different people. Because of Rachmana, and if it would said V'lakchu v'rasnu, if the Torah would have been consistent using the plural in both cases, I would have thought ad shakli trey, that we definitely need two people to gather, to join together as a partnership in taking the Efer, the Yav tray, and two, to pour the water on the Efer. Is therefore because Rachmana, the Torah changes its language, V'lakchu in Lashon Rabin, V'rasan in Lashon Yachid afilu shakal trei v'yoyev chad. That's fine, even if, let's say, two people would take the afer and one would pour the mayim. And we learn from this that the Torah is not makbid, that the same person who does the netilas afer is the person who puts the mayim to be makadish the afer. So now let's just summarize this last sugya that we learned. We have a machlokes in drasha how to darshan the pasuk. According to the Rabbanon, we're going to apply the principle of Ula, which is called mashma memela, which means that the later pasuk is being makayim the limit of the first pasuk, and the original pasuk was machshir for kiddush. Those who are, I'm saying the second pasuk is going to be makayim that those who are kosher for a seifa are also kosher for kiddush. Rabbi Yehuda, on the other hand, is going to apply the exact opposite principle of Ula that we learned about yesterday, which is called motzi miyad mashma. That the pasuk is coming, the later pasuk is coming, lahotzi ulevatel mashmos ha-pasuk shalafonov. The original pasuk says that a katan is disqualified in the case of asifa, and the isha is kshera. And now the pasuk is telling me that when it comes to pouring the water, which is kiddush, on the contrary, it's machshir the katan and disqualifies the isha. Now the Gemara goes on to the next pasuk, which is Nabi Yud Ches in the Parsha Paradu. V'lakach ezov v'taval b'mayim ish tahar, and then it says v'hizah. Now we're ready to implement the hazas may efer paradum on the tummy. This is the moment we've all been waiting for. At the culmination of the entire avodah, the Maisa HaPara, now we're ready for the hazah. Lirabanan, according to Rabbanan who maintain that kiddush of Nesinas Mayim is kosher be each apostle b'katan. And here it says, V'lakach ezov v'taval b'mayim ish. Now it's ish, v'lo isha. And the Rabbanan are going to apply the principle of motzi miyad mashma. So the second pasuk, with regard to the hazah, is going to lafuke levatel, the previous pasuk, that would qualify the isha, and then tar lahachshir sakata. The same Rabbanan who earlier disqualified the katan, now, because of the extra word vitar, are telling you that as far as hazah is concerned, the katan could do the hazah. And in one of the notes, I don't see it right this second, he says that there's going to be a gadol omed al gabav, somebody will supervise him to make sure that he does it with the right kavanah. Ula Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda was the one who maintained that a katan qualifies, he's kosher l'kiddush, and an isha was disqualified for kiddush. Now it says ish v'lo katan. And again, we're applying the principle of motzi miyad mashma, that a katan, as far as hazah is concerned, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is disqualified, and tar lahashir is a isha. So everything is turned inside out, both according to the Rabbanan and according to Rabbi Yehuda, and they're both applying the principles of motzi miyad mashma. And again, what we're saying here is that the Rabbanan who previously had machshir the isha, they passel the kot, but now the opposite is true. They're going to passel the isha and machshir the kot. Rabbi Yehuda, who in regard to kiddush, he said the kot was kosher and the isha's passel. Now it's going to be just the opposite with regard to hazas hamayim, meaning mechatos. The pasuk is teaching me that adrabah, like an isha's kshera, and we're going to exclude a kot. But everybody here is of the same ilk, that motzi miyad mash. Esvei. Now we have a kasha from a Mishnah at the end of Masechet Parah. And this is going to, in a sense, create a contradiction between two statements of Rabbi Yehuda, because until now, we've been assuming that Rabbi Yehuda, in the case of Hazah, right, the actual Hazah on the Tameh, he passes the katan, he's machshir the Isha. But the Mishnah says, Hakol ksherim lahazos. In other words, as far as Hazah from the Ephra Parah, everyone is kosher chutz mi tumtum androgynous, the Isha. Again, tumtum androgynous who are not male, but might not be male in any event, and therefore they're excluded like an Isha. The katan, sheyesh bo das, Isha mesayasa. If the katan is mature and a woman oversees and supervises, making sure that the katan has the right kavana in hazah, that's mazah. He can do the hazah.